Hello and welcome to the War Films podcast, where we're looking at 10 classic war films. This is the fourth one, and we're looking this episode at 1977 film A Bridge Too Far. I'm Garen Ewing. I'm a comic artist and writer. I've done a book called The Adventures of Julius, Chancellor of the Rainbow Orchid, and I'm doing these podcasts with my brother Murray.
Hello, I'm Murray. I'm a writer and I do some music as well. I have a blog called Musings, which you'll find linked to on our Adventure Films podcast website.
So we've done 3 so far. We previously did 10 classic adventure films, and we did those a little quicker. This has been quite a long wait before this one, which I apologise. It's mainly me due to work. I also wondered, I think A Bridge Too Far is quite a long film.
Yeah.
So there was a bit more preparation involved in this one. Also, it is one of my favourite war films. I do sometimes say it's my favourite war film. I'm not so sure about that, partly due to this podcast. I'm thinking, gosh, there's so many good films that I don't know whether to call it my favourite because they're so different. But this has been my long-time favourite. What's your history with this film? Have you seen it before? Well, actually, I know you've seen it before because we saw it at the cinema. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that. I only know I've seen it at the cinema because you've told me.
Okay. So our dad used to take us to the cinema every other weekend, I think.
Yeah.
And on one of those trips, we saw A Bridge Too Far, and this was when it came out in 1977, probably before Star Wars, which came out at Christmas time, I think, and this was in the summer. And I remember thinking, along with another film we saw called The Hiding Place, which we saw at East Grinstead Cinema, that this was one of the most boring films ever. It went on forever. I didn't understand it. I probably didn't think there was enough action. I can remember one scene from it, which was a load of soldiers walking along a hilltop in silhouette against an orange sky. Actually, that scene doesn't exist in the film. There is a scene where there's some soldiers walking in silhouette, but then the very final scene of the film is with Laurence Olivier and Liv Ullmann pulling the cart, walking against an orange sky.
Oh, right.
Anyway, so I'd got that wrong in my little childhood head memory. But since then, I've seen it again, and it's gone way up in my estimation. So, sorry, had you seen it in living memory?
I don't remember seeing it again. I mean, I knew the title, but I didn't know anything about it, really. I didn't know, for instance, that it was very much based on a real events, much more than I think any of the other films we've covered so far.
Yes.
I didn't know it was such a detailed reconstruction of them either. So I really didn't know anything about it going into this watch.
Yes, it is interesting that, unlike the 3 films we've done so far, which are Guns of Navarone, Platoon, and Paths of Glory, which were all fictional, really.
Yeah.
Now, Platoon was based on Oliver Stone's own experiences. The Guns of Navarone was pretty much entirely fictional. It has some elements of minor fact in it, and Paths of Glory also had some. Yeah, it was based in truth, but was a novel, basically.
Though often we find that there are actual events which happened which are similar, apart from with Guns of Navarone, which is very much the heroic version. Although I'm sure missions like that did occur. This one is, as I think you said last time, it's almost like a documentary.
It is really. It's a documentary with massive stars playing the lead roles. But yes, there's not really a story with character development and all that kind of stuff. It really is very much like a documentary. It's very true to the facts of the operation.
And because of that, I found that I got a lot more out of it when I watched it. I watched it first and thought, that was quite good. And then I watched it again, realising that I hadn't been keeping track of who's who. Because the thing is, there's a lot of bridges in this film. It's called A Bridge Too Far, but there are several bridges they have to cross. I think we'll go into exactly what happens in a second.
Yes.
But so a lot of it is visually the same. You see people going through countryside or on roads or on bridges. And so I hadn't really got it worked out in my head who was who and where they were going. So I printed out a map.
Yes.
And I also wrote out who was head of what and where they were going. And suddenly the film was a lot more enjoyable because it made sense.
Well, I've seen this film probably at least 10 times.
Wow.
Over the years. I've had the video for a very long time. And I also, for this podcast, printed out a map and watched the film with a map. And it made a lot more sense to me than it has done. Before I've enjoyed it, it's been fine. But suddenly, because it changes scenes so often back and forth between the different units that it's very easy to get confused as to who's with who and where's where. So, but a map suddenly makes that all clear, and it does make it more enjoyable, I think.
Yeah.
So some basics about the film. As I already said, it was released in 1977. It was directed by Richard Attenborough, his third or fourth film, I'm not sure.
Which is amazing considering the size of the film and the amount of money he must have been working with.
Yes.
And the level of stars.
Yeah, exactly. And I think his previous films hadn't been huge hits. They were critically acclaimed, but had not financially done very well.
Yeah.
So that is amazing. Talking of the finances, it was financed independently by Joseph Levine.
Yeah.
And he paid for the film himself. It was a pet project. I think he stumped up 24 million or 26 million, something like that. Which, I mean, obviously he was rich from his long career as a producer.
Yeah.
He introduced Godzilla to the US.
Oh, did he?
and produced such a huge list of films. So he was well off. If this film hadn't have worked, he'd have been not bankrupt, but he would not have been rich anymore. That's for certain.
Yeah.
But actually, by the time the film started shooting, I think, or by the time it was released, it was 4 million in the black, because he'd gone around getting distribution agreements and showing bits of the film. So it must have been after.
A lot of that thanks to the star names he managed to get involved, which is, as they say, a stellar cast.
Yes, yeah. It was screenplayed by William Goldman, who was a very successful...
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Stepford Wives, Marathon Man, All the President's Men, The Princess Bride. I mean, some of these are based on novels that he wrote. The Princess Bride, for instance.
Yes, and Marathon Man, I think.
Yeah, I think that's... And he's done a lot of Stephen King, and he did Chaplin with Richard Attenborough as well, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. It's based on a book by Cornelius Ryan, who had actually died before this film was made.
Oh, really?
In fact, I think he died while he was on book tour for A Bridge Too Far.
Oh, right.
So I think he died 2 months after its publication.
And was that a novel or a
No, it
non-fiction?
was non-fiction. In fact, I'm halfway through the book at the moment. I didn't quite get to finish it, so I started to read that. He also wrote the book for The Longest Day, which was a 1962 film about D-Day. That was produced by Darryl F. Zanuck. And it's kind of similar to A Bridge Too Far in some ways, because that had a stellar cast. It had John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, Sean Connery, who's also in Bridge Too Far, Richard Burton, Rod Steiger, and more. But that was very documentary-like as well.
Oh, right.
And the Longest Day I considered for this list, and it could certainly replace any of the films. I've had a few tweets about this. Why aren't you including this film? Why aren't you including that film? And they're right, but we had to limit it to 10. And it's a personal 10 in some ways, but there are so many good war films, certainly.
Yeah.
Like Tora 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 is another one I wanted to put in, mainly because of its connection with Kurosawa. Yes. Who started out as director for the Japanese sequences, and then was fired. I just read a very interesting book on that whole story about, I think it's called All the Emperor's Men. I think that's what it's called. All about Kurosawa's time on Tora Tora. Yeah. He only filmed for 2 weeks, but it's enough for a whole book. Very fascinating book. In fact, that was produced by Zanuck as well. That was his project, and he wanted it to be like Longest Day. The Longest Day had 3 directors. It had a British director for the British scenes. It had a German director and an American director, each for their...
Oh, right.
The same with Tora Tora Tora. It had an American director and a Japanese director. Yeah. But Tora 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 was mostly unknowns. Right. In the cast. The Longest Day was very much like A Bridge Too Far. A huge list of the stars at the time. Yeah. And The Longest Day, as I said, was by Cornelius Ryan as well as A Bridge Too Far. So a little load of connected facts there. Yeah.
One thing that Richard Attenborough, I think, said about justifying the use of so many stars is he said they're representing people who were in the army, sort of stars in the army. There are major people, and they said, we're talking about major generals, lieutenant generals, field marshals, and so on, and they all had a great deal of presence. People would know who they were and feel a bit awed in their presence. And so using film stars immediately creates that effect without you having to create the characters with story.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually. I hadn't considered that. And I think if you'd have had unknowns in this film, it wouldn't have been as interesting. It being a very straight documentary. That I'm not sure about that.
Also, it helped me to remember them, because
Yes.
sometimes if you've got unknowns, particularly if they look
Oh, yeah.
similar, then you think, oh, now was he that or that? But this time, I mean, writing down my notes in this, I just wrote Sean Connery and
yes,
whoever,
yeah.
rather than the actual characters' names.
Yeah, because they're the names we know. Yes. So we'll go through the cast as instead of a big list, because there's so many as we go through talking about the film. But the film is about Operation Market Garden, which was a plan that the British General Monty came up with. There were two generals. There was Patton and Montgomery under Eisenhower, who was overall in charge. And there was some rivalry between Patton and Montgomery because they both wanted to be the first to get into Germany.
Yes.
Patton was generally considered the better general.
Yeah.
But Eisenhower went with Montgomery's plan, Operation Market Garden. And the plan was... Now, the Germans, after D-Day, the Germans were starting to fall back.
Yes.
Weaken. And they were being pushed back to Holland.
Yeah.
And Montgomery's plan was to parachute men into Holland behind enemy lines at sort of 3 or 4... Well, to take a series of bridges.
Yeah. The key bridge is Arnhem, which they say is the one that... If they had that bridge, then they'd be able to go straight into Germany, particularly the industrial area of Germany, which means they'd be able to wipe out Germans' ability to manufacture armaments.
Right.
Which would pretty much end... I mean, the whole point of this was to end the war by Christmas.
Yes.
Which it certainly didn't do.
No, unfortunately it didn't. So they're going to take the bridges, and then that was Market.
Yes, it was
two-part
operation.
Garden. So Market was the airborne, and Garden was the ground forces, where 30th Corps... the tank and ground forces would speed up this road, a single highway that connected all the bridges. So the bridges would be taken and the land force would just be able to breeze on through up to Arnhem.
Because they were in Belgium, and the road from Belgium to Arnhem in Holland was the one they're basically following, which has got, I don't know, 5 or 6 bridges on. Yeah,
probably, yeah. Okay, so that's the basics. And they had 7... Once it was agreed to go, they had 7 days to get it in order.
And they're saying this is the largest operation of its kind, dropping 35,000 men behind enemy lines. And as we go through the beginning of the film, we find out it's not just the largest operation of its kind in the shortest time done, but there's all sorts of other things that get... all sorts of other restrictions and firsts that come along, which make me think, surely they should be having second doubts by now. But another point about this is that before this, I think they say they've had 16 operations which they started to put forward and then had to be cancelled at the last minute due to weather or enemy movements or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a feeling among the British that they just want the war over. And this is something I've heard people say about Operation Market Garden. One of the reasons why Montgomery's was chosen over Patton was because there was a real feeling that just let's get it over with. The Germans are retreating. Let's just finish it. Yeah. Rather than doing something more sure and steady, which would prolong the war, but might be more assured of getting a result.
Yeah, because Eisenhower and Patton wanted what was called a broad front, which was a general sweep along the front as they come in and battling as they go. This was punching through one spot.
Yeah.
Very quick and powerful, and it's a good plan, I think, basically. I think it's a good plan. The problem being you'd be surrounded by Germans. But they thought the Germans were demoralised, leaving, and they kind of were.
Yeah.
They were. The Dutch had the feeling. There's a bit scene at the beginning where one of the Dutch resistance and his son, or is it Peter, I think his name is?
Oh, I can't remember the name.
I'm going to call him Peter throughout this. It might not be. They're counting the tanks that have come through their town.
Yeah.
And he says, they find they're increasing actually, so things are going the other way. But he says the week before, your mother and I could have taken Holland alone because there were so few. But now they seem to be increasing. So yes, I was just going to say overall, the interesting thing about this film is it's not about a great Allied victory. It's about a kind of a great Allied disaster.
Yeah. Oh, It's not entirely a disaster, but
No.
it sort of is.
Well, Montgomery said it was 90% successful.
Yeah, which is yeah. But one thing to say about this is that what the Germans were saying is they, near the beginning, they say basically what's happening is we're retreating faster than the Allies can advance, because the Allies needed lines of supplies.
Yes.
They'd broken through at the beaches on D-Day and were chasing the Germans, but they needed. The further they went after the Germans, the longer the line of food and ammunition required to actually keep them going.
Yes, of course, lines of supply. Yeah.
Whereas, of course, the Germans were retreating over their own lines of supply, so they weren't at all pushed. They could retreat as fast as they needed to.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Allies were stretched.
So the film starts with a narration, actually,
Yeah.
of a woman talking over some news footage, and the woman is actually Kate Horse, who was played by Liv Ullmann in the film.
Oh, you mean this is the actual?
She's the actual lady.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh.
She was known as Angel of Arnhem because she gave her house to the British to use as a hospital, and she helped look after these men. So yeah, that's actually her voice at the beginning. Now, I don't know where to start with this film. It's such a massive. I've never had so many notes and bits of paper. And I'm probably going to be. I feel quite well prepared with notes, but I'm going to probably more confused as we go through it because there's so much to reference.
I suppose one thing to point out before we actually get into the film is just how much attention to historical detail was used.
Yeah.
They tried everywhere to get the actual tanks, actual planes and so on. I heard somewhere that one of the tanks was taken off a war memorial where it had been bolted onto a platform.
Oh.
So they basically got every surviving tank of this one type
Yeah.
to get the right sort. In some cases, like the gliders that were used, they said there weren't even any illustrations or plans of how the gliders looked.
Right.
But they built them, each one costing £35,000 each.
Wow. God. The thing I heard about the gliders, I mean, there was news footage of them, so they could see them, but they actually weren't built to fly, of course, and you don't see any in the air.
No.
But they did have them being pulled along on the runway.
Yeah.
And apparently the guy who designed them so well that actually they did start to take off. But they couldn't let them take off because if they got in the air, they'd probably break apart. They weren't designed for flight.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit scary. In fact, the designer of the aircraft was actually piloting one of the gliders
Oh, really?
on the one of the takeoff scenes, and I think the one of the technical crew said he was taking his life in his hands doing that. But yes, and just the logistics of this film are amazing. It's like another war.
Yes.
They had to source aircraft, so the Dakotas that dropped the paratroopers and towed the gliders. As you say, the equipment. Now, I believe there were no German tanks or airplanes available. There's just nothing around, and that's been a problem for all war films.
Oh, really?
So the German tanks in this were Dutch tanks, dressed up to look like German tanks. But the guns, the uniforms, and the number of people.
I was going to say, the number of explosions.
Oh,
once you get into a war scene, you know, you're used to it, like in the Guns of Navarone, you see an explosion, but here you see it gives you a good sense of what it would have been like to be under a barrage.
Yeah.
But also, I'm also sitting there thinking, just think how much this cost.
Yes.
Explosion after explosion.
Yeah.
Lots of people, and also the scene which comes later where you got parachuters coming down from the sky. None of this is CGI, so everything is actually done.
Yeah.
And you got hundreds of people dropping onto the ground, and of course they had to be trained paratroopers.
Yeah, well, there were three armies. They were British, Dutch, and Polish, I think.
Yeah.
And they basically treated it as an exercise.
Yeah.
It was a great opportunity for an exercise. That was the parachute drop. And the other thing they used the army for, I can't remember who it was, whether it was the Dutch or maybe even the British. Probably the British, actually. Where they built the Bailey Bridge across the river.
Oh, yes, yeah.
They used that as an exercise as well for young recruits who had done that before.
I think we've come across that in the Guns of Navarone. I was going to call it the Bridges of Navarone, where actual military get involved, and it helps the cost of the whole film. Which reminds me of one of the best-looking Doctor Who series was the Sea Devils, where they got the Navy to participate for free, basically.
Right.
And so you've got actual boats and you know, actual Navy soldiers, not
Yes,
soldiers,
sailors.
sailors. Yeah.
Yeah, well, war games, that's what they, I mean, it's useful for them, so
yeah.
that's interesting.
So I think we should start by saying we start, as with so many war films, start with people, generals with a map and pointers saying what's going to happen.
Yes.
So often in films of this sort, you get, this is what we're going to do, and they point out all the dangers involved. Like in the Guns of Navarone, it was pointing out the dangers that they have to encounter.
Yeah.
Here, you get a sense that they're saying, this is the plan. Oh, we're going to drop you here. You're going to take the bridge. We're going to do this, and it's all as though it's going to be easy. They know it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
And almost straight away, we start getting things going wrong. So, for instance, they say, right, we're going to drop you Sean Connery's men. He's General Urquhart. Major General Robert Urquhart, but for some reason he gets called Roy a lot.
Yeah.
I don't really understand that. The idea is he's going to be taking Arnhem, and they're going to drop him close to that. But when it comes to it, they say, oh, we can't drop you here. They end up dropping him 8 miles away, I think.
Yes, yeah, off the map.
Yeah.
off the map they got on the wall.
There's this great scene where they put up a big photograph of the bridge at Arnhem.
Yeah.
And he says, well, where are you going to drop us?
I need drop zones as close as possible to the bridge. Now, clearly this area's no use at all. Can't have my chaps landing on the top of chimneys, but... Now, this looks inviting here. What's the terrain like?
Sorry, sir. All our reports indicate that this terrain here is too soft for glider landings. You see, the nose digs in first on touchdown, the whole thing goes arse over tip, total write-off.
All right. What about that?
No, afraid not, sir. You see, after the drop, when we banked for our return, we ran into a whole lot of flak and rubbish in this very airfield up here at Deal.
Presumably you're intending to let us land somewhere.
It's here, and he points to a point off the photograph.
Yeah, and the Polish general, Major General Sosabowski, who is quite critical and worried about this plan, and especially his soldiers' role in it, comes up to him, stands behind him, and the map guy turns around, realises someone's behind him. Can I help you? He says, just checking whose side you're on. As he points out this ridiculous landing.
Yeah.
And that was one of the points, is they couldn't drop the men on Arnhem, which they wanted to, which would have been the ideal thing, because they got to take the bridges quickly. This whole thing was about speed, and this was probably, well, this is why it's called a bridge too far. Lieutenant General Browning, who was in charge of the airborne, the operation,
played by Dirk Bogarde.
Indeed, yes. He repeatedly said, I always thought we were going a bridge too far. And that's, he thought, was why the operation failed.
But you don't get any sense of that at the beginning. He's totally... I mean, I suppose he would be.
He says it at the end only.
Yeah.
Apparently he said it earlier on, but...
Oh.
Now, while we're talking about Browning and Bogart, I want to say that Dirk Bogart's real name, because I did this with Douglas.
Oh, yeah, Kirk Douglas, yeah.
His real name was Derek Jules Gaspard Ulrich Niven van den Bogarde.
Wow.
But he fought in the war, Bogarde, and he didn't like Germans the generation that fought in the war.
Right.
He was quite anti-German,
Although
particularly of that generation.
Yeah. He was actually involved in Operation Market Garden.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's the only one who was. And he said it's so strange at the end, him actually seeing the events that he was involved in. He was in sort of military intelligence, I think, rather than being a frontline fighter. Obviously, he wasn't a lieutenant general, but he was the only one who was actually involved in this operation.
Okay, I do know that Bogarde claimed that he was at the liberation of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
Oh, right.
But when people looked into that, they said actually he couldn't have been. So there's some question over the veracity of that. There was another person involved in Market Garden, involved in the film, actually, and that's John Addison, who did the music.
Oh, right.
He served in Market Garden, and he felt very close to this project because of that. And actually, I don't know if it was him who said, I think it was Richard Attenborough who said he felt as though Addison was writing a requiem for his fallen comrades.
Yeah.
And they agreed that they wouldn't write any music for the battle scenes. So it was really related to the characters rather than the action. So there were mainly themes based around the characters. But yeah, so I didn't know Bogarde was as well. And Browning, who Bogarde's playing, Lieutenant General Browning, is quite interesting. He married Daphne du Maurier, the author of Rebecca.
Yeah.
And she was a friend of Bogarde until she saw the depiction of her late husband, I think, because he died in 1965, in the film, and hated it because he comes out of it fairly negatively, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's quite... Well, the main thing is he ignores the Dutch resistance information.
Yeah, that there are tanks.
But we'll get onto that next. That's quite an important bit. But so yeah, Daphne du Maurier was very critical, and and I think Browning. Bogarde actually had second thoughts about it as well later, but that broke up their relationship. But Browning also was an Olympic bobsleigh competitor. He competed in the 1928 Wimbledon Olympics. The other thing about him, he's got that strange top.
Yeah, so I wondered about that.
Everyone else has got what you'd expect.
It's almost like a jumpsuit.
He's got this sort of jumper with a zip at the top.
Yeah.
That was a top he designed himself.
Oh, really?
It was his own unique
I was thinking...
thing.
Surely,
not Bogarde, but Browning.
Yeah. I was looking at it thinking, why does he have such a different uniform?
Yeah.
And I wondered, everyone's got their own pick of military uniforms.
Well, he obviously had some kind of fashion interest, because I think he's also the one who introduced the red berets, or the sort of wine-coloured berets for the airborne forces, which I think they have to this day. So yes, that's Browning. Now, so yes, the Dutch resistance, which are, and they focus on two characters, a father and a son, who kind of represent the Dutch resistance, and they send back information to Britain that the Germans are stronger than they think. And the guy who gets this is quite an interesting character as well.
Oh yes, Major Fuller.
That's right. Whose real name, he's based on a character called Major Brian Urquhart.
Oh right.
But they changed his name because you'd have two Urquharts,
yeah.
so it would get confusing, as if it wasn't confusing enough. But yeah, so in the film he's Major Fuller, played by Frank Grimes, and he's quite sceptical of Market Garden because he's getting this intelligence.
Yeah. Well, he's presented as being quite a worrying character.
Yeah, anxious.
So yeah, and there's a bit of tension between him and Browning, where Major Fuller says, I seem to be the only person raising objections, type thing. But at first, Browning says,
he's quite sympathetic to him, isn't
he basically says, you're the one who worries because you seem to be more intelligent than the rest of us.
Yes,
I can't remember
I wouldn't worry too much.
Yeah. But then we get a scene shortly after, perhaps where it's deemed that Fuller is worrying too much.
Yes.
He gets a visit from the doctor who says, old chap, maybe you've been working too hard, which seems a bit like a way of getting him out of the way.
Now he's allowed to do another reconnaissance trip and get some photos. And there's a great scene, one of my favourite scenes in the film, where the boy is cycling along, and over the brow of the hill behind him comes, I think it's a Spitfire.
Yeah, low flying, very low.
Beautiful shot where it just rises up out of the ground and flies over. And I find it quite moving, because the Dutch have been occupied for almost 4 years or something.
Well, 5 years, he says, because the boy actually says how old he was when...
right, yes,
yeah, when
9
the Germans
and 14,
came,
that's right. And suddenly there's these little glimpses of something happening. So to see this symbol of British, which is quite evocative anyway, the Spitfire, fly over, and it sees the boy, he's on his bicycle, and gives a little dip of the wings.
Yeah.
It's quite a moving moment.
And he's just waving like anything. So he's waving at the Spitfire. The Spitfire goes over and then comes back.
Yes.
And then the boy looks at the undergrowth ahead and sees in it a load of tanks.
Yes.
Semi-covered.
Yeah.
And this connects to a scene slightly earlier, which I think is a brilliant setup, where the Germans are discussing what to do as part of their retreat. A new, I think it's Field Marshal Model, comes in. He's in charge of what's happening now after D-Day. All the Germans are low morale, and they're thinking, what can we do? But he's brought in Newt, and he says, right, we're going to try and take control of the situation. One of the things we've got to do, he says, is we've got a Panzer division which has been fighting too hard. We need to give it a rest. Where can we give it a rest? And they say, well, Arnhem. So he says, okay, well, we'll bring this Panzer division back to Arnhem. Now, this is a completely untactical move.
Two divisions, actually, I think.
Oh, right, yeah. It's not done for the sake of defending Arnhem. It's just, it totally happens that so it's nothing that the Allies could predict. But it's a key decision, it turns out.
Yes. So this Spitfire has taken photographs, and they go back, and Fuller shows Browning the photographs. Quite plainly, there are German Panzer unit. There's a German Panzer unit hidden there, and Browning looks worried.
Yeah.
But he can't. There's a line that people keep saying, "I don't want to be the one to rock the boat," or "I don't want to be the one to spoil the party," because this is going ahead.
Yeah.
Anyone who speaks out is going to be there's a kind of a joint bravado. There's lots of people probably thinking, "I'm not sure about this, but I've got to go along with everyone else," and the momentum is happening. So as you say, he gets sort of put on not very voluntary sick leave.
Whenever you read about history, there's always this debate about whether individuals make history or whether there are historical forces.
Yeah.
And in this, you feel that there is a slight historical force. Everyone wants the war to end, and so they blind themselves to the details, telling them that this particular operation isn't going to succeed.
Yeah.
And they just sort of cross their fingers, and it feels like a momentum. You know, that I don't think anyone's to blame. But in a sense, a lot of people are to blame.
Yeah. Just to go back to Brian Urquhart, because I said he was an interesting character, and he was, or is actually, I think he's still alive, amazingly. Right. The last we see of him is kind of, he's stressed out, slight tears in his eyes as he's got on sick leave. So he seems like slightly not pathetic maybe, but certainly someone who's perhaps about to have a nervous breakdown because of the conflicts he feels and the fact that he seems to be a lone voice. But he wants to do the right thing. Yeah. So he's a very admirable character. He later helped capture the Nazi nuclear scientist Wilhelm Groth. He helped set up the United Nations. I think he was the second member of the United Nations.
Really?
In 1945. He was the aide to its first and second secretaries. Didn't get on so well with the first secretary, but very much liked and important to the second one. He came up with their blue helmets that Soldier receives today. He was involved in setting up the peacekeeping forces in the Suez and Congo, where he was abducted and beaten, but managed to get out. And I think he's still alive today and has written several books on the United Nations. That's his biggest legacy.
Oh, right.
So I kind of just wanted to put that in there because he's fairly...
Yeah, he's a minor character in this, but he's obviously had a much bigger role in the world story.
Indeed. And just going on to the Germans, you mentioned Model. He was played by Walter Kohat. He was an Austrian, and he was married to Imi Schell, who was the sister of Maximilian Schell, who played General Bittrick.
Oh, right. Now, I recognised Maximilian Schell. I didn't recognise his face, but I recognised his name because he played a character in Disney's The Black Hole. He played the mad scientist who's in a spaceship hanging on the edge of a black hole.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Bittrick was quite interesting. He was known as the most sarcastic man in Germany. And he wasn't a great supporter of Hitler. He kind of went along. There was even a time when there was a plot. There were several plots against Hitler, and on one of them he was approached and he did offer his men to support it.
Oh, really?
So he's quite honourable in the film, isn't he?
Yes,
because he's the one who allows the British to have some time to tend to their wounded and get their wounded out. Yeah, he gives them I think 3 hours.
Yes, yeah.
Where the German before that was saying no, out of the question. He comes along as the superior officer and changes that. Yeah. And also when Arnhem is lost, and they're all captured, he's quite friendly towards the British. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, we keep on coming across this thing of good Germans and bad Germans.
Yes.
Where there's the soldiers who stick to the code of war. Yeah. And, once an enemy is defeated, they, take them prisoner and treat them with respect. And he's that sort of one.
We're interested in that kind of... That's interesting, the good Germans and bad Germans, because we're interested in those who were good, because again, we've talked about this before, the big question of just following orders. Yeah. What would you do in that situation? Again, it's this momentum. Are you the lone voice that goes against it? Well, you're probably going to end up in a concentration camp or a prisoner, or certainly socially outcast at the very least. So he went along with it. There was a real story of when the British put up their white flag at Arnhem and they came out. A German opened up his machine gun on them, and an officer went over to the German and started kicking him a German officer
Yeah.
went over to his own soldier and started kicking him, telling him, "Can't you see the white flag?" So perhaps a good German.
Yes. Yeah.
But with the Nuremberg trials afterwards and war crimes, that becomes a very important question. So these
Yes.
little acts, you kind of hang on to them because you want to know there are people like that. And there were lots of, looking into this film and the background to it, there's some horrendous stories what the Germans did, and there are also the things like allowing the British to leave. They did take prisoners. They didn't just get the British and shoot them. They took plenty of prisoners, which is, when you're at war with someone, it's the right thing to do, and it's the honourable thing to do.
Yeah.
And it did happen. One of the most amazing scenes is where the planes take off.
Oh yes.
And fill the sky.
Yeah, you've got a scene in a church where normal English people are having a service.
Normal?
Yeah, sort of not soldiers. I mean,
yes, civilians. Yeah.
And they hear planes going over, and obviously they're worried because it wouldn't have been on the news that there's going to be a fly past, and they go out, and the sky is just full of bombers. And it's such an awe-inspiring scene. Just imagine walking out now and seeing the sky full of bombers. What would you think?
And that's based on a part of the book. That actually happens.
Right.
There's a bit of Cornelius Ryan's book where he talks about a particular sermon being given, and it was just totally drowned out, and the whole congregation left to go and look outside.
And of course, this is another thing about this operation, because they're shifting so many people. They have to do it by day. Yeah. And there's several moments in this where operations should be conducted by night, for instance, and they get moved on. There's the crossing of a river later on, and it has to be done by day, which is completely insane. And because you obviously you can be seen by the enemy. But initially it goes all right, because this first parachuting
amazingly well.
Yeah, they're not spotted. Later on, there's parachuters being gunned down, but this time
Polish,
they all land. And we got that scene in Paths of Glory where the general's walking along the trenches saying hello to men. We get a similar scene here where Edward Fox's character, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, is driving along with Michael Caine's character, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Vandeleur, who's head of the Irish Guards.
Yeah.
I presume they're in Belgium. They're on the end of this road with an awful lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
And they're driving past the vehicles, and Edward Fox's character is saying, "Oh, hello, Jimmy. Glad to see you know where we're going," because they've obviously decorated the tanks.
Yeah, Berlin or bust or something.
But one thing to say about this is that the road that they're going to follow to get to Arnhem is only a single carriageway.
Yeah.
And they've got an awful lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
And one thing I saw in a documentary about this is saying one of the inaccuracies in this film is you wouldn't have tanks that close together,
right?
If they're travelling in convoy. You'd have them a lot further apart. I don't know if it's because of their firepower or because of the risk of being hit. So one of the problems that the Allies experience is traffic jams, which isn't something you think about in a war film, But just being able to get the equipment they need to the front is a major task.
Yeah. That speech that Horrocks gives... this is a story you'll tell your grandchildren. A lot of those lines he actually said historically are from Horrocks.
That's a Richard III sort of line there. Not Richard III. Henry V, sorry.
Right, yes.
So you'll remember this one day.
He didn't... Not the bit about the cavalry, he didn't say. I like to see this as... And that's interesting. William Goldman said... He said, today people wouldn't understand that. If you're steeped in the films of that... people who saw this film in 1977 knew about westerns. Yeah. The Indians, I'm doing air quotes, Native Americans, and the cavalry. Yeah. He said people today they think cavalry. I don't know if that's true, but maybe that's just because I know I saw westerns and understand it. But that was a point he made.
Gentlemen, I'm not saying that this will be the easiest party that we've ever attended, but I still wouldn't miss it for the world. I like to think of this as one of those American Western films. The paratroops, lacking substantial equipment, always short of food, these are the besieged homesteaders. The Germans, well, naturally, they're the bad guys. And 30 Corps, we, my friends, are the cavalry on the way to the rescue.
Edward Fox was in Oh, What a Lovely War in '69, which was a Richard Attenborough film.
Oh.
He was also in the sequel to The Guns of Navarone, Force 10 from Navarone.
Oh, yes.
And in another Attenborough film, he was in Gandhi in 1982.
Right.
Roger Moore was the first choice to play Horrocks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Should I say, oh, really?
Yeah, but he was too busy with...
Sorry, that was a terrible impression.
That's right, the eyebrow was good. He was busy with The Spy Who Loved Me. Edward Fox was actually a friend of Horrocks, and knew him.
Oh, right.
So he wanted to do a very good job of getting him right.
Yeah.
Horrocks was in World War One, as a lot of these generals were. He served in the Russian Revolution, supporting the White Army, because the British sent a contingent to help. He was also in the Olympics. He was a pentathlete in the 1924 Olympics.
Good Lord.
He was Black Rod in the House of Lords in 1949 to 63, and he did some TV presenting in the 60s.
What?
And he also advised on this film. He died in 1985. So just interesting to know the characters behind these and what happened afterwards, you know. And Michael Caine. Now, he has been in 3 of our films. So he was in The Man Who Would Be King.
Right, yeah. Oh.
He's in this one.
Yeah.
And actually, he is in The Eagle Has Landed, which we're going to do.
He's also in Zulu, isn't he?
Oh, Zulu, yes, that's 4, isn't it?
In fact, Zulu was... That wasn't the film that made... I can't remember if that was the film that made him or the Ipcress file.
Zulu was the year before.
Oh, right.
64, and the Ipcress file was 65. He was in Alfie in 66. So in the 1960s.
Yeah.
The Italian Job in 69. Get Carter 71. The Man Who Would Be King 75. The Eagle Has Landed, which we're doing 1976. So that was just before this one. So yes, you can see the calibre of the stars that are in this film. They were major stars. So the 30th Corps, they witness the wave of aircraft go over, and then off they start as well.
Yes, yeah.
Incredible. The parachute landing, which you've already talked about, which was, we do see all these parachutists,
and we also see a camera going down with one of the parachutists.
Yes, I think they
was
had
brilliant.
3 cameras up in the air or something.
Yeah.
They only had 1 accident, apparently. One guy landed quite I think he broke his arm or something, and I believe the crew all worried about him, and one of the sergeants or officers came up and said, you know, that's his job, and he got taken off in an ambulance. But there were a couple of real stories that made me chuckle from the book, which aren't in the film. In the aircraft, you see a guy with a chicken. You think, weird?
Alan Armstrong.
That's true. There was, and there was a couple of other pets that went as well. Another guy, after the landing, was spotted by an officer carrying a dead quail. He said, "What are you doing with that?" And he'd landed on it and killed it, and decided to keep it for food.
Yeah.
Another guy landed on the wing of a landed glider, which bounced up, acting as a trampoline, and he went way up back in the air on his parachute, and then just landed really gently on his feet. But there were stories like that made me laugh.
Wow.
Quite funny.
I wondered about the chicken, because you never see it again.
No. Yeah, there were some other stories about pets that were taken as well. It's just, you know, you're going into war, I'm going to take this chicken. As if you haven't... These men had a huge weight of equipment to carry with them.
Yeah.
And they I think they had to be very careful about dropping some of this equipment on a rope from their legs before they landed.
I saw that, with a gun or something. Someone's rifle was...
Various things, I don't know, but if you didn't do that, you had a chance of injury.
Oh, right.
But, anyway, that was all part of it.
So when they land, we see Sean Connery's men are all gathered, and one of the things that is going to prove to be a major complication later on is that all the radios they've got have been fitted with the wrong crystals. This is something which a modern viewer might not really understand. It's just how important and difficult communications were then.
Why didn't they just use their mobile phones?
Just how... this is one of the things I like about war films, seeing them now, is because I always used to have such a simplistic view of war.
Yeah.
You know, I thought battles happen in a battlefield, so you'll have the goodies and baddies on each side of a field and they'll just fight each other. But things like this film show just how small things like the geography affect the complete outcome. And one of the things is just being able to get a message through to find out what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, of course, we're jumping around in the film, seeing what everything's happening.
Yes.
So you don't get the sense of Sean Connery's character saying, "Well, I don't know what's going on now."
Yeah.
should I go ahead? Are we surrounded by Germans? What's happening?
And they all had problems with their radios.
Mm.
I saw an interview with a guy who lived, a Dutch chap, and he said, I think one of the things was the ground there, the clay or whatever, the sand, whatever was in there, was full of iron. It was very rich in iron.
Oh, really?
And he said he could never listen to the radio. It was only recently when they got cable,
really,
in the modern age, that he actually was able to listen to proper radio. It was always bad. So it wasn't just the wrong crystals, it was the fact that it was geographically rubbish for radio waves or whatever.
And that was the only sort of communication they had.
The two characters who are in charge of the radio are quite funny, aren't they? And when they're preparing, he's one of the ones who says, I don't want to rock. They're kind of aware that...
Yeah, someone's going to go... Because he says, these radios have been tested for... they'll travel for 8 miles. And he says, yeah, but you tested them in a desert.
Yes.
This is a country full of trees and water and obviously all things which absorb radio signals.
Yeah. As they're having their biscuits. The British are very British, aren't they? You've got those two with their tea and biscuits and old chap. And the other interesting character is Anthony Hopkins, who plays John Frost.
Yeah. Now I saw the
Lieutenant
actual Lieutenant Colonel John Frost in a documentary.
Oh right.
And he's very posh British, and so he's exactly like Anthony Hopkins' character, who, when we first see him, he's prepared. He says, "Oh, have you packed my dinner jacket and golf clubs?"
Yes.
So he's obviously expecting. And he's got a little bugle that he blows. That's his oddity.
All true. All true stuff. Now, Anthony Hopkins. So he was in Young Winston in '72, which was another Attenborough film.
Oh right.
He was in The Elephant Man, Silence of the Lambs, of course. He was in Chaplin. I think he plays the biographer. I can't remember. Remains of the Day.
Yes. Merchant Ivory.
Yes, The Shadowlands.
Yeah.
Which was Attenborough. Was that the one about
C.S. Lewis?
C.S. Lewis, yeah. And Frost is an interesting. He's kind of. He seems quite kind of cold and correct.
Yeah.
There's not much emotion from him throughout the film, but he's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
And he was an advisor on the film.
Yeah, I saw him in this documentary. I saw he's there at the Arnhem Bridge, or the equivalent in this. Seeing the scenes which obviously he witnessed firsthand.
Well, he was at the bridge was named John Frost Bridge, which he was quite embarrassed about.
Oh. But
today it's named John Frost Bridge.
So he was saying he was looking back on the events that he actually was part of, and he says he doesn't remember the horrible things so much. So he's obviously one of these people who's wasn't so traumatized by it, even though could potentially have been.
or blanked out.
yeah
That's the other option. He seems to be a fairly, I think, typical of British officers. There's pride in what they do, but there's also a kind of humbleness, whether that's true or faux.
Well, there's a story that Anthony Hopkins told, where he says in a later scene where they're at Arnhem Bridge and he's got John Frost has got to cross from one building to another. He says, Anthony Hopkins said, "Well, I did what I thought I'd do, which is run as fast as I can so as not to get shot." Yeah, but John Frost told him that what you'd actually do is you'd walk out slightly slowly, daring, saying you're being contemptuous of the Germans. You're saying you're not going to shoot me.
Yeah, I think that was fairly unique to Frost.
Oh right.
He said, "I never ran." And they checked with some of the other soldiers he served with. He said, "Yeah, no, he never ran." Another interesting story from that is, the scene where the German comes across the bridge with a white flag.
Yes, yeah.
And he says, "We want to talk about surrender."
Yeah.
And I don't know whether the British say, "We don't have the facilities to take you all."
Yeah, deliberately misunderstanding.
Deliberate. I don't know. Is it deliberate?
I'm sure they're being humorous. Pretending that they're in such a strong position that the Germans are surrendering to them, where in fact the Germans are offering them the chance to surrender.
Well, apparently Frost said that line, but he asked for him not to say it in the film. He said, "I don't want to," because he's worried his friends would think he was being egotistical.
Oh, right.
And so the solution was they gave it to his runner.
Yeah, the man with the umbrella.
Yeah, because William Goldman said, "Well, do you mind being present while the line is spoken?" He said no.
Yeah.
So that's why the other guy got it. But apparently it was Frost who said that.
Yeah.
Well, a highlight of some of the dialogue in the film.
There's an awful lot of scenes which happen, which it's difficult to recall exactly where they are. There's one scene I wanted to mention, which is when one of the gliders or planes has crashed. A German soldier goes in and discovers plans, maps, details, which were supposed to have been left in Britain.
I think it says on the front, how Market Garden works.
Yeah. Which is similar to a scene in Platoon, where they discover the maps, but they're booby-trapped.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So he takes these to General Model, who is the typical general who thinks he knows it all. And he says, this is obviously a deception. I was thinking at the time, oh, God, they're going to know everything now. But General Model, this is the second major thing that he's misunderstood, because when he hears that the Allied forces are coming, he says, there's nothing important at Arnhem. Wait, I'm at Arnhem. They're coming for me.
Yes, I'm important, yeah.
But here he says, oh, these maps are obviously a fake. And so that's at one point where the whole thing could have been given up. But a dumb general, there are so many, I don't not Lieutenant General, Field Marshal, whatever, the people at the top who don't understand.
But he is advised by Ludwig, and who's the SS guy, German in black.
I think he's a Panzer. He's the head of the Panzer Division.
Right.
I thought, is he SS? But actually he's Panzer Division.
I think he is SS as well.
Oh, is he?
And Bittrick as well.
Yeah.
Both are saying they're coming for the bridges.
Yeah.
And even advise destroying the bridges.
Yeah, they're constantly saying.
He dismisses it.
Yeah.
That's true. I'll just talk about
Karl Ludwig, Hardy Kruger.
Yes.
He was actually in the German forces.
He was.
But he was... Right near the end of the war, he says, when the Germans were getting desperate for more soldiers, they recruited old men and Hitler Youth, which is actually something they say at the beginning of this film. Browning, I think, says, Arnhem will only, there won't be any strong forces there. It's just old men and young boys. Well, Hardy Kruger was one of the young boys. He was in the Hitler Youth, and he was brought into the war as a very young man, apparently.
Yes, and he was captured by the US forces.
Oh, right.
So he plays Major General Ludwig, who is a fictional character, but he was pretty much based... Well, it's a fictional name. He was based on Heinz Harmel, who didn't want his name in the film, but he did tell his story to Cornelius Ryan.
Oh, right.
He was in the Waffen-SS. He was a prisoner of war in the UK for 2 years, and then was a salesman in Germany.
Oh, right.
He died in 2000, so one of the longer living of those characters. But he does actually decide to blow on the bridges on his own volition, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He
or to attempt to.
Is it Nijmegen Bridge, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the big one before Arnhem, so it's Nijmegen.
Yeah, Nijmegen.
He has got it all wired up.
Yeah.
And as the bridges come across, they plunge the plunger and nothing happens, so... And he says nothing can stop them now.
Yeah.
Not quite true.
Oh, there is another bridge. I think it's the one at Son.
Yes.
That does get blown up.
Yes, just as Elliot Gould is running towards it.
That's a rare comic moment where they see the bridge. Elliot Gould is Colonel Bobby Stout. He sees the bridge ahead and it's not held. There's no Germans in sight, so they're all running towards it. And he runs faster to be the one who crosses it.
He's pushing them out of the way, isn't he? It's fantastic.
So it's a comic moment. And then as they get inside of it, it's blown up.
Yeah.
And he says, right... We need some of that Bailey stuff, which is that marvel of British engineering, which is the sort of instant bridge.
The instant bridge, yeah.
Which isn't as instant as he'd like, obviously.
Elliot Gould, playing Colonel Stout, was based, again, on there was no Stout, but he was based on Robert Sink, who served in Korea and Vietnam, and just a little connection with Platoon. Colonel Sink...
Right.
Appeared. Do you remember the Band of Brothers, the Spielberg?
Yeah, didn't see it.
I watched it. It was very good.
Oh, right.
He appeared in that, and he was played by Dale Dye, who was the main military advisor of Platoon. He's the one who wrote the novelisation.
Oh, right.
And who played the captain as well.
Yeah.
He was actually in Vietnam as well. So Dale Dye, if you remember him, he played Sink in Band of Brothers.
Oh, right.
And Elliot Gould, of course, was in Friends. Ross and Monica's father, and MASH.
Or the film rather than the TV series.
Yes, 1970.
Yeah.
He's kind of comic. There's another great scene where he eventually he's after these Bailey bridges.
Yeah.
And he catches up with the British. I guess he goes back to Eindhoven.
Yes.
So the 30 Corps have reached Eindhoven. The Dutch crowds have come out.
They think it's almost like a liberation. This is the end of the war, and they're treating it like a victory parade.
Yes.
Which is actually slowing down the forces.
Well, it is, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, they must have been just waiting for the Allies to roll through.
Yeah.
And,
in the book, they talk about how the Dutch citizens rifled through their stuff to get every bit of orange cloth they could to go out. There was some disaster as well, though, because before the British started on the highway, and before the operation, they barrage, which you don't see in the film. The only thing you see in the film of that is the, I'm going to use the word lunatic here, which I know is not right, the lunatic asylum.
They call them
the mental health patients.
Yeah.
They come out and they're kind of laughing at Sean Connery, aren't they?
Yeah.
That was destroyed by the Allies.
Oh, right. Yeah, because that's not really explained.
No. And there were Dutch citizens killed in that original... Actually, it was bombing raids. There's a story of a Dutch man working out in the fields, and he sees the bombs going off in his hometown, and he rushes back and finds his son, his arms blown off. He's still alive. His 14-year-old son, lying in the rubble, his arms off, his sides open, and he says, "I can't feel my arm because it's lying nowhere." The dad says, "Oh, it's because you're lying on it." And he tries to get him to hospital, and he dies, unfortunately. Very sad story, but that is the truth of what happened. So there was that aspect to it, as well as the euphoria of the British coming. Anyway, I was talking about a slightly lighter moment of levity where Elliot Gould catches up with, is it Michael Caine?
Yes, Vandeleur.
That's where he says, "Do you mean that marvel of British engineering?"
Yeah.
And so yes, he gets those bridges. And
well, what's happened is Michael Caine's character is finding it. He's trying to bring the Bailey bridges to Elliot Gould, but he's being slowed down by the Victory Parade.
Right.
But Elliot Gould says, "Oh, I've thought of that. I've cleared another road so that you can get them through quickly." Now, at this point, we're told that already the operation speed was of the essence, but we're already 16 or 32 hours behind.
Yeah.
Things have been going wrong.
Well, because we didn't talk about this amazing scene. As soon as 30 Corps get going, they come across a strong force of Germans in the forest.
Yeah.
And the lead tank is exploded, is fired upon. Well, they all are. And so they have to have a pitched battle. Goodness knows how many miles, hardly any.
And that's when they release purple smoke, which is the signal to bring in bombers.
Yeah. But that's one of these scenes, you're talking about the explosions.
Yes.
It's just, there's this creeping forward. The artillery fires and explosions get closer and closer to the forest. Utterly amazing explosions, and just an amazing scene.
The devastation, and particularly later when we get to Arnhem Bridge, which was actually filmed somewhere else, which looked like Arnhem.
Yeah, Deventer or something.
The whole place is just destroyed.
Well, the bridge at Deventer, which they used for Arnhem, at one end of it, because Arnhem was too modern, and there was too many modern buildings and stuff. The Arnhem Bridge was destroyed 3 times in the Second World War, I think.
Oh, God.
So they found this bridge that was very similar in a smaller town that they were able to use. At one end of it was a car park, and they built a set on that car park, which was the buildings that you see getting destroyed and that Frost and his men are hiding out in.
Yeah.
So that was very fortuitous for that.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to remember why I went. Oh yes, why they were 30th Corps were behind was because of this battle.
Yes,
as one thing.
Immediately get.
There's another scene. Just I'm looking at the map and thinking, what else happened in the Eindhoven? So the 101st Airborne, the Americans, are the ones that have landed just north of Eindhoven.
Yeah.
And Elliot Gould liberating the Somme Bridge, which explodes. The other main character with the 101st is James Caan, who we haven't talked about.
Yes.
So James Caan plays Sergeant Eddie Dohan.
Yeah. Just
looking at Caan, he was in, previous to Bridge Too Far, he was in The Godfather, Rollerball.
I like Rollerball.
I also want to mention The Killer Elite, which is not a famous film, but I like to say to people, whenever they mention James Caan, I go, "Oh, I've met James Caan," and it's not actually true; it's a lie. But I'm gonna keep saying it. I was in the same room as James Caan.
Good Lord!
Yeah, I think that's good, isn't it? So I say I just promote that to I've met him, but I haven't, because when I lived in America in the mid-80s, I did karate under a Japanese teacher called Takayuki Kubota, and Kubota was in this film Killer Elite, which is where James Caan met him, and James Caan started training in karate under him, and is now a 6th Dan or something. So this was at the one of the International Karate Association, which is Kubota's organisation, one of his annual tournaments and general parties.
Yeah.
He's got a very international organisation. James Caan was there. So I met him. I looked at him for a few feet. So I like to always mention the Killer Elite when. This is, whenever I see this film, I always think, was this story true? Because his captain, played by Nicholas Campbell, who I think was Johnson, Legs Johnson was the real character, is a kind of alcoholic. Well, he's very nervous.
Yeah.
And he says, "You guarantee me that
Very young.
I'm not going to die."
Yeah.
Yes. I always thought that Dohan was his senior.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the young chap who's the captain.
Oh, really?
Now, I don't know if they changed it for the film, but in reality, Dohan was his runner. So that's the background. He guarantee me that I won't die. He's really nervous. He says, "I guarantee it." Now we meet James Caan. He's heard that the 101st have been involved in
action
battle.
Yeah.
There's a scene where he finds his body. He's been shot in the head. Johnson's been shot in the head. James Caan grabs him, takes him through a German-infested forest. An excellent scene to the medical unit.
Yeah.
And insists to the surgeon that he has a look at him.
Yeah.
The surgeon says, "No, he's dead. Put him with the others."
Yeah, and you see a line of corpses, basically.
So James Caan pulls a gun on him and says, "See to him."
Yeah.
The surgeon has no choice, looks at him and says, "Son of a bitch, she's still alive," and he saves him.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, is that true?
Yeah.
I haven't got to that part in the book.
Oh, right.
Yet. But it is true.
Oh.
Ish.
All right.
So Eddie Dohan was... Well, Dohan, I think Eddie, he actually had a different first name, was his runner. And what happened was Johnson was wounded in the leg and was evacuated on the hood of a jeep.
Right.
But while he was being evacuated, he was shot in the head.
Oh.
His brains were showing and everything. And they thought, well, he's a goner. So they put him with the dead. Dohan, being his runner, what he actually came looking for him was he knew Eddie had a lot of cash on him. And it wasn't to steal it. He was worried someone else was going to steal his money, so he was going to take it to make sure it went to the right people. And saw that even though his brain was hanging out or whatever, that he was still breathing. So he took him to the surgeon. He did pull a gun on him.
Really?
It was a imitation Luger. He had actually quite a small gun. Oh. They saw he was still alive, and they did save him. And he regained consciousness 6 weeks after the operation.
Oh my God!
I think this from what I quickly read. The surgeon did report him, but it was the military policeman who put him under arrest just for 1 minute, not 10 seconds, or perhaps technically, and then let him go.
Oh, now I didn't know that. Because I must say, I've watched this film twice before.
Yeah.
And that was my least favourite part of the film.
Right. Oh, really?
I'll tell you why. Because watching this film, I almost feel as though it's like two films going on, battling with each other. There's a British film and an American film.
Yes.
The British film is a lot, and of course this is my cultural bias.
Yeah.
The British film is a lot of reserve and understatement.
Yeah.
So you get, for instance, Anthony Hopkins' character being very stiff-faced and with a bit of humour and understatement, saying, "Oh yeah, we could do with some help here," while they're being barraged by tanks.
Yes.
Whereas the Americans, the American stars, all have their moment where, I think this is almost true of all of them, where they have a go at someone, usually a British person, saying, "Why are you so tight-assed? You just want a cup of tea and all this." Even though usually in that situation it's being unfair, but they always have this heroic moment, whereas the British have an understated moment.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah.
And this one, I thought, seemed to me, I didn't know it was true at all.
No, well,
it seemed to be so much like part of another film.
Yeah.
It felt like part of a heroic war film.
Yeah.
Which, if you'd seen it in like The Guns of Navarone, would have made sense. But here, the documentary feel of the rest of the film made it stand out to me as being, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
So I'm amazed that it did happen.
Yeah. Well, it was changed.
Yeah.
So he didn't go and personally save him.
Yeah.
So that was.
But I mean, the gun. That's the thing. I thought, no, surely not.
Yes.
Yeah. But you know.
By the way, Johnson, the young captain, did you recognise him from anything else?
No.
He played the serial killer policeman in The Dead Zone.
Oh, good.
One of my favourite films.
Oh.
That's yeah. Do you recognise? Do you remember that? Anyway, I've seen that recently, which is you might not have seen it for a while.
Well, I'll tell you, as we're leaping around a bit, there's a few minor.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's stars here, which everyone recognises, and there's a few other actors who I think later become famous. Like I've already mentioned Alan Armstrong, which was the bloke with the chicken.
Yeah. And the chicken as well went on to quite a few big roles.
He was in Chicken Run, wasn't he? Or was Chicken Advisor. There's also John Ratzenberger, later on who was in Cheers.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name in Cheers.
Cliff.
Yeah, Cliff. Yeah, because I can.
Norm.
Norm.
Can I just say something? He was played Lieutenant Magellas.
Oh right.
And he was playing an actual person called Magellas. Now, in the film, Cliff.
Yeah.
Norm. He gets shot in the eye, doesn't he? And dies.
Yeah, he dies. Yeah.
Yeah. The actual Magellas survived the war and was even awarded the DSC for his action at Nijmegen, and is the most decorated officer in the history of the 82nd Airborne Division during World War II.
Blimey.
So he didn't get shot in the eye.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yes.
So there's one. There's an actor called John Salthouse who was in Abigail's Party and The Bill. In Abigail's Party, he plays a husband who's very, very tight and
Is he
angry.
the footballer?
I can't remember.
The red-headed one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, brilliant. Who was he in this?
I saw the first series of The Bill, and he's brilliant in it because he's so pent-up fury.
He was in The Bill. Yes, yeah.
Now, do you remember him in this film?
No.
Now, there's at one point where Sean Connery's men have retreated to a house. And they're saying that the British are dropping supplies, but they're too far away.
Now I know who you mean.
And they see one land, and so this bloke runs out and grabs this supply container.
Yeah.
And they're all cheering him on, and he starts to run back, and he gets shot.
Yeah.
And it opens, and it just turns to be full of berets.
Great scene.
Yeah.
Oh,
but that
the
is
pathos. The pathos.
That's John Salthouse.
Oh, brilliant. I was reading about him recently, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he in Abigail's Party, I think his character background is that he was almost a professional footballer and then had an injury, and that's he was actually trialled for Crystal Palace or something.
Yeah.
Yes, there were about 50 actors in this film who were extras. There were different kinds of extras. There were extras who were just in the crowd. There were also about 50 actors who were called Attenborough's Army or something, who were trained by the army so they could use guns and everything. They played Germans and British.
Yeah.
And one of the funny stories about them is that a lot of them became quite famous actors afterwards. They were all young men in this. But if their face appeared too strongly in a scene, they couldn't be used again because they couldn't play a British
and then a German
person and be seen and then a German. But because they were enjoying the film so much and wanted the work, what they do is if they would do anything to hide their face. So as an example, let's say one of them was playing a German.
Yeah.
They'd be running towards the camera and they'd get shot. They'd fling their arms up, twist, pull their helmet over their face and then fall down so that their visage was not shown on the screen. So that's the Bailey Bridge. If we move on to Nijmegen, the general here is Brigadier General Gavin, played by Ryan O'Neill.
Yes.
And his story is quite interesting in this film. He lands, he's one of the main generals at the beginning, he's Brigadier General. And when he lands, he injures himself.
Yes, yeah,
And
injures his back.
Yes, there's a good scene later relating to your interesting point about American and British, where he comes up to the British and he's this isn't happening, blah, 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 blah. And his Dutch advisor says, "I'm sorry about that. I think he might have cracked his spine when he landed." Because the British are all, "What's this yank telling us?" And then they kind of look at him and see him holding his back, and
because he's asking for boats at that point. Isn't he?
And nothing seems to be going right. And actually, Gavin did. He thought he'd just injured himself. It was several weeks later, I think it was something like 5 months later. He actually discovered he was still having trouble and discovered that he'd cracked 2 vertebrae during that landing. So, yeah, Ryan O'Neill, he made his name in Love Story in 1970. Was in Paper Moon and Barry Lyndon, which was Kubrick film.
Right, yeah.
General Gavin is interesting. He reportedly had an affair with Marlene Dietrich. Yes, he landed in the film. He lands on grass and hurts himself.
Yeah.
He actually landed on pavement in reality and fractured 2 discs. He was later ambassador to France in the early 60s. He was an advisor on the film. Now, I find this is interesting. He was played by Ryan O'Neill.
Yeah.
In The Longest Day, he's also a character, and he was played by Robert Ryan. Both of those books were written by Cornelius Ryan. Brigadier General Gavin's real name was actually Ryan. His surname was Ryan. He was born illegitimate to a mother who was called Ryan, and he was adopted by the Gavin family.
Oh.
So he was a Ryan. He was played by Ryan O'Neill and Robert Ryan, and the book was written by Cornelius Ryan. If that doesn't prove that 9/11 was an inside job, then I don't know what these conspiracy theorists are on about. Yeah, but he's good in this film.
Yeah,
all the actors are good,
yeah,
aren't they? Even though they're big stars.
Yeah. Of course, that leads on to what I've heard described as, in reality, was the most heroic thing anyone has ever seen. This actual advisor to the film said it was the most heroic action he'd ever seen, which is crossing the Nijmegen Bridge, crossing the river Vaal.
Yeah, Vaal.
Because someone says, in order to take a bridge, you've got to take both sides.
Yes.
Until you do that, you haven't got the bridge, and also because the enemy can just blow it up. So when they come to take Nijmegen Bridge, they send some people over by boat to try and take the other side. And of course, this is Robert Redford.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure I heard that in actual fact it was British troops who did it.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, right.
No. They got the boats.
Yeah.
Right? The flat-bottomed boats. Each boat had a 3-man crew.
Right.
Which would probably be British.
Oh, okay, right.
But it was the Americans who went across.
Yeah. So anyway, they...
The reason they had... Each boat came with 3 men and 3 paddles.
Yeah.
And the reason being that the boats had to get back across, you see, generally speaking.
Oh,
that's why each boat came with... Normally it wouldn't be a one-way trip.
Yeah.
So they drop off the men and go back.
Yeah. But this is this is almost like a mission in...
Sort of a submission.
Yeah, submission.
That's the wrong word.
Just like the whole big mission. It goes wrong from the start. They say, right, we want you to cross this river to get to the other side, and it's going to be at night.
Of course.
But then the boats haven't arrived, so it gets put off to 9. There's a succession of scenes where they discuss it happening, and each time the time has moved from 9 to 11 to midday.
Yeah.
So they're going to do this crossing in full view of the Germans.
Yeah. So
they're basically going to get shot to pieces. You know it. Which is, I can understand why it was described as one of the most heroic actions of the, this man had seen.
The British did provide a tank fire.
Yeah.
For smoke.
Yeah.
But the wind was so strong that there was hardly any smoke, so they were in full view.
Yeah.
A tour guide in Nijmegen who does tours of this thing, he said to his crowd of 10 people who he said, if you all lit up a cigar now, that would be more smoke than they had at Nijmegen.
Oh, God, yeah.
Robert Redford was probably the biggest star of the time this film had. I think they wanted Steve McQueen.
Oh, right.
Because he was
he
was the big star, but they asked for too much money, and I think something like $6 million to appear in this and another film at the time. And Levine had to buy his house, McQueen's house, which he was having trouble selling. So then, they got Robert Redford, who was a big star.
Yeah. And worked with William Goldman in All the President's Men.
Yes, yes.
And Butch Cassidy. Was he in Butch Cassidy?
And The Sundance Kid, yes.
Yes, yeah.
And The Sting and The Great Gatsby, all in the 70s. So, yeah. Because Robert Redford appears quite late in the film, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's one of the things that...
He's only there for a short time. He's not... A lot of the others are in throughout the film.
He doesn't even get, like you'd expect, a sort of a brief glimpse near the beginning of the film just to say, hey, Robert Redford's in this film.
Yeah.
You know...
I guess he was on this... His name was big.
Yes, yeah.
On this scene, they get across, those who survive. It's a great scene where they run up the side of the bridge and they do take it. Did you notice the Germans, talking about old men and boys, one of the Germans is almost a baby.
Really?
He must have been a 12-year-old kid. I need to pause the film and you see it. There's a bit where a German's in a foxhole firing them. And it's a child. And I just wondered if Attenborough used an actual sort of 12-year-old child to accentuate. He's only there for a flash.
Yeah.
To accentuate the fact that this is the children and or the young
old men
boys.
and children. Yeah.
Just to give a sense of how young they are. But that's another great scene.
Yeah, this is where General Carl Ludwig says, "Right, blow up the bridge," even though he's been told by Field Marshal Model not to. Yeah. He's obviously determined that the Allies aren't going to get through.
Yes.
So they press the plunger, and I'm never sure why it doesn't go off. Maybe it just something happened.
One of those things, it must happen.
The strange thing is, of course, that Robert Redford's character is crossing the bridge at that point.
Yeah.
So you'd expect him to accentuate his heroism by being the one who saves the bridge.
Yeah.
But they obviously decided to stick to the facts rather than...
Yes, very much
which is,
so. And a point about that is that, I think William Goldman said this, Richard Attenborough was very aware that people who were involved in the campaign were still alive and were going to see this and wanted to be true to the book.
Yeah.
So it mostly is, 95%. I just wanted to remind me, mentioning Germans there's a funny story which I thought was worth telling. Is with all the organisation, and they had, for the Germans were played, the lead characters were played by Austrians and Germans, and this driver went to collect one of these actors, an Austrian or German, from Amsterdam airport or something.
Right.
Didn't know who he was, so just had his name up on a board. And a German guy, he picked up this German chap, brought him all the way back. He got fitted up in a Nazi outfit, and then went to meet Richard Attenborough, because Richard Attenborough was a very nice person.
Yes,
and he was brilliant with actors and always said hilarious stuff. At this point, they discovered he wasn't the actor. He was actually the East German agricultural minister. And so he was apologised. He was taken out and taken back. But the guy who told the story said, "I'm just amazed. He never said anything, even when he was being put in a Nazi uniform."
Obviously, that's diplomats for you. Just keep calm.
Yeah, great story.
Anyway, so after the bridge is taken, this is one of the points that gets my goat a bit.
Right.
Robert Redford has a go. The British tanks come over. Yeah. And Robert Redford has a real go at him.
Those are British troops at Arnhem. They're hurt, bad. You're not going to stop. Not now.
I'm sorry, we have our orders.
We busted our asses getting here. Half my men are killed, and you're just going to stop? And drink tea?
Look, we're now facing a completely different situation. We can't leave with tanks up that road. Jerry will pick us off like sitting ducks. Our infantry are still fighting in Nijmegen. When they get here, we'll move on.
For Christ's sake, must you do everything but a book?
Our orders are to wait for the infantry. I'm sorry, but there it is.
Now, you could say that he's just been through an extremely traumatic mission, and he's on a high. But he does do the thing saying, "Oh, do you always have to drink tea?" And I thought, but he's got a point. They have to stop. If they just go ahead, they'll get blown up. But it's presented as the American having a heroic go at the British, which of course gets
Another story about Robert Redford. During that crossing, he actually said afterwards, "That's the scariest thing I've ever done," because there were charges going off in the water, and one of the technical crew was in the same boat as Robert Redford with a camera. And the boats and the current of the river was stronger than they thought. Yeah. They actually had little motors in the boats to keep them going. Right. But there were certain charges on some of the boats to be blown up and in the water. But immediately all the boats got mixed up. They didn't know where it was, so it got quite chaotic. And they carried on filming and up and blah, blah. And Robert Redford came back after the scene was filmed, and he was quite angry because it was chaos. It was a genuinely dramatic. Yeah. It was chaos. It was a lot of the explosions were very close. Didn't know where they were happening. And the guy sort of made him feel better by saying, that was. Yeah, he said it was. He says, but the camera was on you all the time. And Robert Redford suddenly realised that this was a very exciting, real scene, and he wasn't replaced by a stuntman. He was doing it himself, and how good that would be. And that made mollified him. So goodness me, if we go up to sort of looking at Arnhem, I think this is easier doing it geographically than chronologically.
Yes, yeah.
So we've got Sean Connery with the 1st Airborne, and Anthony Hopkins is in Arnhem.
Holding the bridge. Amazingly.
Yeah,
they do quite a good job. There's a brilliant scene where they send Alan Armstrong with a flamethrower over at night to try and get there's a little gun port. Yeah, pillbox. Yeah. And he accidentally lets off the flamethrower, misses the pillbox, and hits an ammo dump by accident.
Well, the first they think they just hits a little hut. He goes, "You idiot, you've missed."
And it's like the most successful thing that's happened in this film so far. It just blows up and, of course, destroys the German pillbox.
Yeah.
But after that, it's pretty much all downhill, because...
this is where the Panzer divisions are, so there's very strong resistance.
So they come over.
They do make several attempts and fail, the Germans, but eventually they get over, and it's real hand-to-hand fighting. One of the interesting things about this film and the backdrop is just the Dutch background to it. I mean, there's scenes, particularly with Sean Connery, he gets separated from his men and can't get back because he gets stuck in Oosterbeek, I think.
Oh, right, yeah, it's a little town.
And these are houses that you'd recognise today.
Yes.
They're quite modern. I mean, they're 1940s, but it looks like a modern housing estate.
Yeah.
And there's tanks and Germans and troops, and they, you know, it's that feeling. I find the Dutch aspect of World War II very interesting.
Yeah.
And so you get that. So when you get this street fighting,
and in people's living rooms.
Yes,
I mean, there's that brilliant scene where Sean Connery and they brought one of their wounded into someone's living room, and there's an old couple saying, "We'll look after him," and then a German soldier walks past the window, turns, and in the middle of this conversation, Sean Connery shoots the German through the window.
Yeah.
Because it's in someone's in this small living room, it suddenly seems so much more violent than anything else that's happened.
Yes. I mean, these were normal people's lives. Trying to imagine that, where an invading force comes in, takes over your country.
Even a liberating force here brings violence with it.
Of course, yeah, but that's a good scene as well, where they get separated and have to get back.
There's I think in quick succession, 3 scenes which end up with people saying, "We're surrounded." At one point, it's Sean Connery's character realise they're surrounded. Another point, it's Anthony Hopkins' character.
Yeah.
They're on the corner of the bridge at Arnhem, but they realise that there are Germans behind them and over the bridge.
Yes. I mean, that's how it was. So, because, as you said earlier, Sean Connery was landed, his units were landed 8 miles.
Yeah.
In fact, they all were. They were all landed 8 miles. And there were 3 routes to get to Arnhem. I think they were called something like Lion, Leopard and Tiger. Something, so each had to take one. And they all ran up against heavier German opposition than they thought. Frost got through.
Yeah.
He had 750 men, I think, with him in Arnhem.
Right. Yeah.
Tiny number. And he was just waiting for the others to join him.
Yes.
And then eventually the Polish were going to land and they were going to join them. But none of them could get through. And Sean Connery's lot ended up in this little... It's called the Thumb, which is one of the RAMC chaps describes to Liv Ullmann. He goes into all the military jargon. And
yes.
Anyway, they were completely surrounded and they just had to sort of batten down. This was at the Holstein Hotel, was their HQ.
Right, yeah.
And they had the area around it. That's where the British were trying to do these drops of supplies.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting thing. The Germans knew all the British signs for landing.
Oh.
You know, land here, you know, drop your stuff here.
Of course, yeah.
So the British were told to ignore any signs from the ground.
Yes.
And drop them in the official landing zone. So they did that despite the fact that it had changed. The British were trying to do their landing signs, but they were told to ignore them. So it's just this. The Germans were just closing in and closing in. We've got Laurence Olivier in this film as well.
Yes.
Who plays a Dutch doctor. And this is the Liv Ullmann. Her house is taken over. This is the Angel of Arnhem.
Yeah, used as a
Kate Horst
hospital.
Yeah. I got confused actually because the Holstein Hotel and Liv Ullmann's house look very similar.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I read this that I realised that they were different locations.
Oh, right.
And if you look at them in the film, one is absolutely... The hospital one is completely... Or is it the other? I can't remember now, the Holstein. Completely blown to pieces. And I mean, at the end of the film, when Liv Ullmann and Laurence Olivier leave, and the children, their front garden is a graveyard. You see it at the beginning, they're coming out with their orange things, right? At the end, their front garden's a graveyard with crosses and everything. I mean,
because there's something that happened after the events in this film, is there was a terrible winter in Holland, and I think and of course the Germans were still in control, and I think it was after all the victory parades and thinking they'd been liberated, it was almost worse than before.
Just before Market Garden, the Dutch government, who were in exile in Britain, and so was the Dutch Queen, I don't know if ordered or asked the Dutch railway workers to go on strike. And this was to help, because they knew the Germans were retreating. This was kind of part of that. This was only a couple of days before Market Garden happened. When Market Garden failed, in retaliation for that strike and for helping the British during Market Garden, the Germans cut off all food delivery to, I think, the west of Holland or something. So they had nothing to eat. One guy I saw interviewed said they ate tulips. He said, to this day I hate tulips, and he said, and my parents would that was their business, tulips.
Yeah.
But he was forced to eat them as a boy during the war.
Poisonous, aren't they?
Well, I don't know. Whatever they did, I mean, maybe there was some way of cooking them. But
It's like a bowl, it's like an onion.
22,000 Dutch people died of starvation during that winter.
Oh God!
Until they were relieved in April 1945.
Yeah.
You know, Operation Market Garden was a 90% successful. They didn't take the bridge at Arnhem, but they did liberate the Eindhoven and I think Nijmegen. So they did get that far, and those weren't taken back by the Germans.
And looking at a map, Nijmegen is very close to Germany. I don't know if there's mountains in the way or something which made Arnhem a better
It's
bridge
not a very
to
mountainous country, is it?
Yeah, I don't know, but of course, Holland. Yeah,
I mean, as you say, they had to take Arnhem. That was the route into the Ruhr region where the German factories, armaments factories, were. That was the thing that would have
finished the war by Christmas.
But yeah, I mean, we could go on about various scenes in this film for a long time. It's almost a 3-hour film, I think.
Yeah.
But we probably need to wrap up. Is there anything? What's your general sense of? Go on.
Yeah, they end up 1 mile away from there. You know, when they decide to give up, and Sean Connery's character finally gets radio contact, and he's told, right, retreat.
Yes.
They're 1 mile away from their objective, which makes you feel as though it's so close. And there's a speech at the end where all the lieutenant generals and so on meet, and they each were saying, why did we fail? It was Nijmegen. It was the fact that we only had a single lane road. Yeah. It was the fog which prevented the Polish from even leaving England until too late. We
didn't mention Denham Elliott plays an RAF meteorologist.
Oh yes,
who says, "I'm awfully sorry, but this is the thing about fog." As
it's a slippery chap.
Yeah,
well, quite literally. I love Denham Elliott.
Very good. Only a very short scene.
Yeah,
I just want to mention another scene at the end where Sean Connery has got out, because they get the order to withdraw and they have to go across the river, back across the river at near Arnhem, Oosterbeek, and as he drives to the Browning's HQ in Holland, the geese are going and they're laughing at him.
Oh, right,
and it's like, do you remember the asylum patients?
Yes.
They're laughing, and he says, they're laughing. It's the geese are doing the same thing at the end.
Yeah,
which I think is a nice bit.
Now he does get one line now where Dirk Bogarde's character says to him, "You did all you could."
Yeah.
And Sean Connery says, "Yes, but did everyone else?"
Yeah.
Which is the one point where it's not blamed on the situation, but you think, well, what does he? I didn't know exactly what he meant there, but
I mean, think about it. He was parachuted into this ridiculous position, 8 kilometres from Arnhem, and was waiting for everyone, and they never came, and he had no communication, so he had no idea.
It's almost instantly.
Were they trying hard enough? Did they realise the situation he was in, surrounded by? I mean, that was the worst. The Battle of Arnhem was probably the worst bit of the whole thing. Some terrible scenes there for the British. Just kept running into Germans. Apparently there was one bit during the operation where it was night, it was foggy, the British were marching along. I can't remember which bit this was on, it was earlier, and they were marching against some people. Suddenly they realised the people they were marching with were speaking German.
Oh my God.
And they were 2 columns. There was the German and the British marching along. They didn't realise for several, I don't know if it was minutes and then they realised that a fight broke out. Oh my God. That's the chaos.
Yeah. So it's a brilliant film, I think, and it's also unlike any of the others we've done before. But it really shows, those are shown like heroic and personal stories, where this is a lot more about the strategy and tactics and how things can go wrong on an operational level rather than personal stories.
Yeah.
I thought, because of the way it's structured, jumping around lots of little stories with well-known actors, it was almost like a disaster film.
Yeah.
Which there were a lot around in the 1970s, where you'd have a lot of little stories.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good that it's unlike any of the other any of the other films we've looked at in this series so far.
I'm just looking at the others. Most of our 10 films are fictional.
Yeah.
We're looking at Zulu, which is based on a true event. Downfall, which is based on a true event, and Bridge on the River Kwai, based on a true event. The next film we're doing is It Happened Here, which is probably the least known of the films we're looking at.
I haven't seen it before.
So it's 1964, so going back a bit. directed by Kevin Brownlow, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
A shorter film, but very fictional, because it's about the Germans invading Britain.
Yeah.
And as if it's a what if. What if they invaded Britain? So I think we could go on about A Bridge Too Far a lot. Very good film.
Yeah.
Successfully done film.
Yeah.
Definitely worth watching. You just need 3 hours. Watch it and print out a map.
Yes.
So you can look at who's who and where's where.
Yeah.
Helps. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and we'll look forward to doing the next War Films podcast for It Happened Here. Bye for now.
Bye.